Hey, this is Pastor Curry, pastor of the Zion Fair Baptist Church, Wilmington's most exciting church, the church that love ya and anything you can do about it. Today with Coffee with Curry, we're going to continue from last week's show when we talked about the environmental injustice that is going on where the underprivileged communities are not being able to get some of the voice that needs to be out there as it relates to the environment and how there's a lot of pollution that happens in our community that doesn't happen in others. So we had last week Mark. This week we want to continue it, and we have Willie Scott, and he's from the Sierra Club of the Delaware chapter, and he's going to really get into some details with us so that we can continue this quest of understanding all that HB, or should I say HB, yes, it is HB 422 is all about. We also just learned that HB 422 will come under a different title come next year because of the new time that they're going to share. So why don't you call somebody real quickly? Tell them Coffee with Curry is on, and let's get after it.
Good morning, Delaware and surrounding areas. You are now tuned in to this week's Coffee with Curry. Join us every Sunday at 11 a.m. with new guests every week. So grab your cup of coffee and join us on Coffee with Curry.
And we're back. What a great joy, what a privilege it is, Mr. Scott, to have you with us today. I'm told that you're the guru of this topic, so I'm looking forward to this conversation. Welcome to the Coffee with Curry show.
Well, pleasure to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk about HB 422 or whatever new name it comes to the next time around.
Absolutely. Great. Well, let's start off by talking about the Sierra Club, because I when you said where you were from, I didn't know anything about it. And I'm sure many of the viewers won't know as well. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the Sierra Club is an old organization. It's been around for, I guess, over 100 years now. And it's a national organization. Primarily, its focus has been on conservation, from its roots to, recent years. And, you think about, preservation of natural lands, preservation of water, clean air, and those kind of things. Over the last 5 or 6 years, the tone has kind of shifted within the club to where we now just focus on not just those things, but also focusing on things like clean energy, and other sources of pollution. And also environmental justice has become a big component of the club's charter, so to speak. So we have a local chapter here in Delaware, covers the entire state, but it's located here in Wilmington. I serve as the vice chair of the executive committee for that chapter, as well as the chair of the Environmental Justice Committee, which we formed, I guess, about 4 years ago now, 3 to 4 years ago. So been pretty active in the local community at various levels. But you make a great point in that you didn't recognize the name, and that's one of the things we have to overcome now, is getting our name out there and ensuring that people understand who we are, what we do, how we can help, and how we can be of support to local communities.
Okay. Now you said you were one of the founders, or you helped to found the Injustice Board.
The environmental justice.
Tell me why you felt the need to do that.
So it's interesting. So my background is from industry.
Okay.
I worked in industry all of my life in manufacturing. And so I had kind of a perspective of, what happens inside a facility, some of these chemical plants that we see, but also a perspective of what could be better. And then as I look at Delaware in general, not just Newcastle, but the entire state, we've got a legacy in the state of pollution. Okay, the economic backbone of the state, was from the chemical industry, some of which I worked in. Okay, and so we've had this evolution that came through redlining and some other sources or other mechanisms that put us in a predicament where we've got people and polluting industries living in the same spaces. And you see that across the state. And so if you look at Newcastle, we've got a heavily industrialized base here in Newcastle with a lot of polluting industries. And, some of those sources of pollution come from some really toxic sources, so they're not good things for you, for people to breathe. If you look further downstate, we've got issues with things like groundwater contamination from a couple of sources, one being the large poultry industry that we have in the southern part of the state. And so the waste from those poultry farms, when we're talking industrial scale poultry farms here now, not the family poultry farms, but the waste from those facilities will wind up leaching into the soil and eventually into the water. So you get issues with groundwater contamination in the southern part of the state. We've also got some issues around Dover from the Air Force Base. They do a lot of firefighting practicing there, and the foams they use when they put out fires from, diesel fuel or from jet fuel, as those are washed away, they also go into the soil and create problems with water contamination. So as you look down through the state, we've got a variety of issues, that put people in communities that are adjacent to these facilities in pretty dire straits. And so that kind of piqued my interest as, that being an issue, and then thinking about, okay, how can we address those things and how can we get our arms around it? And there's been a lot of work. You had Mark on last week. The Nature Society has been heavily involved in trying to help with particularly with clean water. They've done a tremendous job on water issues across the state. The Sierra Club has been actively involved in working on air pollution, but typically from the side of, how do we get clean energy? My focus has been on, okay, that's great, you guys work on that. I want to work on some of the issues that plague our environmental justice communities across the state, which are sometimes more specific, so working on clean air, it helps everybody. But then underneath that umbrella, we have to really look more finely and try to understand, okay, in various communities across the state, what are the specific issues that they face or that they confront, as it relates to air pollution or water pollution. And that kind of takes you down the environmental justice path. Typically what you'll see, and this is a general statement that applies across the board, whether it be Delaware or any other state, what we find environmental justice issues is typically in communities where we've got large populations of people of color, people who, don't have good English proficiency, and, there's a socioeconomic factor, in terms of the economic status. And so, Mark mentioned those as being, like sacrifice zones. Yeah. And that's kind of how they're thought of, is that, okay, we've got this new thing we want to build. It's going to create some pollution. Where do we want to put it? Well, we're not going to put it in Greenville, right? Okay.
Absolutely
so,
not.
But we've already got all of these other things over in Southbridge or on Route 9 or, down in Sussex County. Let's put it there, because that's where all of that stuff belongs. And so, to me, that creates this issue where you're violating people's civil rights. Okay, everybody has a civil right. I heard you last week talk about it's a God-given right, and that's a fact. And underneath that, it's a civil right to be able to breathe clean air, drink clean water. Everybody in this country should have access to both of those things. And that kind of, like I said, takes me into this space where these are truly environmental justice issues, or as you refer to them, injustices as they're being perpetrated. And, we have to think about how we can address those.
Yeah. While you were speaking, I thought about we're becoming warehouse world here.
Yeah.
Is that a problem? From just your opinion, because it seems like warehouses are popping up everywhere closer to Wilmington, in Wilmington, even, in fact, there was some issue with one being built here in Southbridge. What is your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so it's common to look at a large distribution facility and say, well, there are no smokestacks coming from it, so it must be okay. But you have to take into consideration other sources of pollution that come along with that. And typically that's going to be from the truck traffic. Diesel trucks emit, serious pollutants, both in the forms of gases as well as particulate matter. And the big issue with particulate matter, and those are very fine particles of soot, basically, that, those trucks emit. When those things get into your lungs, they don't come out. Oh. And so they create long-term health issues. And so really fine particulates, what's called PM 2.5, that's the finest size that people measure or that the regulators measure. Those fine particulates get embedded into your lungs. And like I said, it doesn't come out, and long-term they can create respiratory issues, things like asthma. So while there are no smokestacks coming from the distribution center, the trucks that are coming in and out of the distribution center create an issue, and so those need to be considered as well.
So beyond, some people will sell, like some of the, we called them polluters last week. They will say, hey, we're going to bring jobs to your community.
Yeah.
We're going to make sure your community have jobs here. And you're saying, well, you got to think about the health part.
Yeah, and then that gets to a philosophical issue that we really have to address here in Delaware. Nobody's against new jobs, okay? I'm a strong proponent of building a strong economy and having good paying jobs for everybody in the state, so that people have options and choices on how they, live their lives. I think the shift that we need to make is that we want to have good jobs, but we want to have jobs that don't harm people.
Yes.
Okay, and so you can do both.
Okay.
And that's the thing. It's not an either or, it's an and. Okay, and so we want good jobs, and we want to, have those jobs in a position where they don't harm people. And that's basically what HB 422 is trying to help with. But we've had some resistance from the business community that says exactly that. You're killing jobs. We've had some resistance from unions that say, hey, gee, you're limiting growth here with my company. And that's not the intent. The intent is that you can be profitable, okay, have a good business, and do it in a manner that you don't put people at risk. And that's all we're asking to do.
Okay. And that makes sense. Earlier, you talked a little bit about clean energy.
Mm-hmm.
For my viewers, let's just make sure they understand what is clean energy.
Yeah, that's a good one, because there's this concept called greenwashing that can come into play sometimes.
Okay.
Clean energy is energy that's developed from non-fossil fuel-based sources. So no oil, no coal, no gas, being the source of generating that energy. So you look at things like wind and solar, that's clean, okay? Sometimes we'll get into this greenwash thing where we confuse sustainable sources of energy with clean energy. And so sustainable sometimes might mean that, well, we're going to use ethanol, okay, or corn-based, product. And so we can always grow more corn, right? So it's sustainable, it's renewable in that sense. But it's not necessarily clean, because you're still going to burn it. And, if you go back to your old chemistry class, you remember that you can't destroy matter.
Right.
You just change the form. So when you burn something, you have to think about, okay, what's left when you burn it? So what comes away from that combustion process? And typically, when you burn something, the pollutants that come from that are worse than the product that you tried to destroy or tried to burn. And that's where we get into things like greenhouse gases and other pollutants that wind up in the atmosphere. It's because of, how they're transformed to generate energy and create issues with greenhouse gases. And, sometimes we think about greenhouse gas as just being a climate-related thing, and it predominantly is, because it can affect climate change. And, we see that today, right? Particularly today, right?
Oh, yes, yeah.
But also it's a health issue.
Okay.
Because greenhouse gases can also increase ozone levels. And so when you get into that, you're talking about, smog, basically. And that can affect respiratory function and, create, problems with long-term illnesses and diseases for people that live in areas that have, high levels of ozone. And in Newcastle County, we've done a better job, I think, over the last 2 or 3 years. But we're still in not a very good position in terms of how the EPA rates the air quality in Newcastle County. We're still in that, improving level, but we're not at the great level yet or a good level. So probably a long answer to your question.
It's not a long answer. It's very informative. You give me a lot of information. It's got me thinking, because even with while you were speaking, I didn't want to cut you off, because I really think that you're giving information that people are going to be paying attention to. You remind me of one of the professors I was taught at Lincoln. His name was Dr. Henderson. He believed in making sure thoroughly you understood what his subject matter was. So I'm with you. I'm loving this today. So do you think, like the electric cars, for example, is that considered as good clean energy? Yeah,
so 2 components there. One is the car itself, right?
Okay.
And then the other one is the electricity.
Okay.
That's used to power the car. So the car itself, it eliminates all of the pollution that comes from combustion engines. So there are no emissions that come from the car. The next step back in the process, though, is to think about, okay, where did that electricity come from that you use to charge the car? And so if that electricity was made by a green source or a clean source like wind or solar, then it's good all the way through the line. If it was made from a coal-fired power plant, okay, then, we still got some work to do back upstream to clean that up. And that's one of the key things that the state is working on right now. There's a lot of work that's been done at the legislative level to ensure that Delaware does its part to bring, electric cars into the market in a reasonable period of time to meet its energy goals or its climate goals long term. And then the next step, and you hear a lot about that in this legislative session that just ended, is to look at things like wind energy. So how do we start to participate in that source of electricity generation? The fortunate thing is that Delaware is on the coastline.
Right.
And, we've got, a large ocean front and bay front out, on the East Coast. And those locations are ideal for wind turbines. We don't have the land for it. We're a small state, so you can't put them on land necessarily at the rate that would generate enough electricity to support the state. But there is enough space offshore that we could get a significant portion of our electricity generated from windmills. And there was a lot of work done last year in the legislative session on things like community solar to expand the use of solar energy across the state. So the state's taking steps to bring clean electricity into the marketplace. And then in the recent session, we've taken more steps to ensure that, we've got access to electric vehicles. So yeah, the short answer to your question, electric cars are a good thing. I know there are issues right now, particularly in a lot of our communities, that, the issue of affordability.
Right.
And so I'll put my business hat on, okay? And my belief is that as the demand for electric vehicle goes up, the prices will come down.
Right.
More people will come into the market to produce those vehicles. And as a typical experience, you can probably remember when a big screen TV, right, was $2,000-$3,000. Right. Now you can buy a better big screen TV for $300, right? Yeah. And so that's kind of the way things like that work when new developments come along. Initially, the prices are higher, and eventually, as more competition comes along and the technology becomes more commonplace and easier to manage, the prices go down over time. So that's one outlook that I have personally. And then I think we'll also see a market for used electric vehicles start to develop starting to develop now. Right. And we'll see that increase over the next few years. So I think the affordability issue is something that will kind of work itself out over time. And, the other thing is around infrastructure. If you live in the city, how do you get your car charged? Where do you plug it into? And so,
I saw some creative things in privileged communities, though. I noticed I'm using the word privileged communities.
Right, exactly.
Where they were able to get it at the curb and get some things up. But that's privileged communities.
Exactly.
But not in our communities where
exactly.
It's over, with every car is full of it. We're going to take a quick commercial break. And when we come back, we really want to talk about HB 422. As we talked about it last week with Mark, and we want to continue on. But the purpose for why I asked, and I'm going to call you Professor.
Just call me Willie.
Let's call it Willie. The reason why I really wanted Willie to talk a little bit about some of the other issues in the environment is because I wanted to grab your attention to know that everything matters now. Whether it be the cars that we have in our neighborhoods, when people come into your neighborhood and they say things like, we're going to bring more jobs, but yet they're not paying attention to all the diesel trucks that are coming in that's causing all these pollutants. These things are important. Becoming conscious of the environment and what you're breathing in and consuming is very, very important. So we started off this way. We're going to jump into HB 422 and continue just talking about this because I really want to make sure that our politicians are very clear on we want this, whatever the new bill number will be, to go through so that we can start holding people accountable. We'll be right back.
Join us live for our weekly worship. Every Sunday at 8 a.m. on Facebook and YouTube.
Well, Pastor, I'm doing the best I can, but I still gotta have a little Chardonnay, and I still gotta have a little this, and I gotta still sneak around. The devil is a liar. That's an
Reshaping Church.
We need volunteers, we need mentors, and we need sponsorship. So please think about donating to Duffy Soap. Go on our website, duffysoapinc.org, and donate that way. You can call us at 302-652-3532. We can take your payment over the phone. You can mail us a check at 100 West 10th Street, Suite number 9, Wilmington, Delaware, 19801. Also, you can donate your time. If you don't have money, donate your time. Come help us with the garden. Help us mentor or help be a tutor, things like that. So please think about donating to Duffy Soap.
And we're back. Great information shared as we're learning more about the environment, what we are consuming, as well as inhaling. It's very important that you please make sure you're paying attention. In a lot of the underprivileged communities, they tend to suffer a whole lot because really you're the zone that, okay, we can take a chance on that zone. But in Greenville, you will not find it happening this way. And in other parts of the state where the privileged live, you will not find certain things happening because they won't permit it. They are up to date and up to snuff on a lot of the information. It's time for us to become aware, educated on the various things that affect our lives. Years ago, we probably wouldn't have paid attention to certain things, but there were people who were paying attention, and that's one of the reasons why they are able to live longer. But when you live just for the moment, your life expectancy is much shorter. We must pay attention to what we're breathing. You may not be asthmatic right now. You may not have a lot of health issues right now. But if you don't pay attention, you continue to inhale and drink and eat the things that you should not, it won't be long before you find yourself in trouble. So one of the things they try to do with HB 422 is they're trying to make sure that the overburdened communities get a voice. Mm-hmm. And there's some things they want to happen with this bill. Walk us through it the best that you can.
Sure. And so one thing maybe to help keep things lined out, like I said, HB 422 used to be HB 466, and this year when it comes back, or next year when it comes back, it'll have a different number. The nomenclature maybe to think about is it's called the People's Anti-Pollution Bill.
Okay.
So regardless of what number it has, it'll be the People's Anti-Pollution Bill.
And make sure that that's on the screen for those who are paying attention. The People Anti-Pollution Bill.
The People's Anti-Pollution Bill.
Okay, very good.
And it'll be known by that name, regardless of the bill number.
Okay, good.
So what that bill tries to do, and maybe a good place to start is to think about how and it's focused on the environmental permitting process that DNREC uses today when they look at whether or not they want to give a new facility or an expanding facility a permit to operate, an environmental permit. The way that's done today, DNREC kind of operates on the basis of, we'll look at what the EPA says about, how much pollution you can emit given the type of chemicals that you want to, emit in the size of your operation. And if it meets the EPA, and those are the government, the federal government guidelines, if it meets those guidelines, then they don't have a choice but to say, okay. So the issue with that, and Mark touched on it the last time around, is that when you look at how that process plays out in what we call overburdened communities or environmental justice communities, it's, okay, I've got this facility over here, it's emitting, its thing, whatever that is, all day, every day. I got another one over here. There's a landfill over there. There's a highway back behind me, okay? Mm-hmm. And, there are trucks running up and down the highway, and, so I'm exposed to all of this stuff. That doesn't get taken into consideration in the current permitting process.
Wow.
And so what HB 422 does is to say, no, you need to look at all of that, okay? You need to look at pollution from all sources that affect this particular community,
yes,
okay? And take that into account in addition with the new level of pollution that you're proposing, okay, from this new facility or expanding facility, and do an environmental justice impact analysis. And so what that means is doing a scientific analysis that says, when I look at all of those sources of pollution, the level of that pollution, and then I add this new thing on top of it, what does that mean in terms of the effects on the health of the people that live in that community, okay? And if that's not a positive view, okay, if it says that, no, this is just too much, then it gives DNREC another tool in their toolbox besides the EPA guidelines to say yes or no to that permit. But predominantly, significantly, it gives them a tool to say no. Because right now they only have one tool, and that's, it meets EPA guidelines, so be it. This says that, okay, yeah, it meets EPA guidelines, but when we look at it in totality, the amount of pollution that exists in that community already, plus what you're planning to do with your new facility, is too much. And so DNREC, you can now say no. Okay, and that's the fundamental basis of HB 422 or the People's Anti-Pollution Act. There are a lot of things that come along with that. You and Mark talked a little bit last time around about awareness, as being a concern or an issue. And that is truly a concern. One of the things we hear from EJ communities frequently is that a new facility pops up or an existing facility gets a permit to expand, and they didn't know anything about it, until after the fact. DNREC had already approved the permit, and there was nothing you can do about it, right? The current protocol for DNREC today is that when somebody applies for a new permit, DNREC will advertise it in a newspaper, and you can actually get a message sent, online to your mail to say, hey, so-and-so's applied for a permit in this particular location to do X, right? But if you don't see that, then you miss that communication opportunity, that opportunity to be aware. The second piece of that is that when they put that communication out to say that Company X has applied for a permit, it will typically say there will be no hearing, on this permit unless somebody requests it. Wow. Okay, so it's kind of a default no hearing unless somebody is aware enough to see. If you're not paying attention, you don't know that it's going on, and so nobody has the opportunity to request a permit or request a hearing, right? The other issue there is that even with a hearing, it's a one-way conversation. Okay, so it's DNREC and the applicant standing in front of the people in the community or whoever wants to participate in that hearing to say, here's what we propose to do. Boom. What do you think about it? Okay, and so people get a chance to say, hey, I either support this or I don't support it, and then that goes on to the record, and DNREC takes that output into consideration when they look at, approving or disapproving the permit. But it's not a conversational thing, so it's not a chance for you to say, tell me more about what you want to do, and tell me how this is going to affect me. And so there's not an opportunity for people to ask questions, and get answers, in that process in a hearing. So what HB 422 does on the front end is to say, okay, you got to really work on your outreach, and so you publish the notice, but we also want you to consider the people that you're publishing the notice for. And so if it's an area where there's low English proficiency, then you need to publish the notice in the language of the people that live in the community, so that they can at least read it, right? Let's start there. And you need to do that in several forms, newspapers as well as social media, as well as the mailings that you currently do and the electronic mailings that you currently do. The public hearing is not optional. It's not only held if somebody requests one. If the facility is in an overburdened community as defined by this bill, then you must have a public hearing. It's not an option. And also you must have what's called a community information session, which is a more open format. And so that community information session would be held before the hearing, and it would afford members of the community to have a dialogue with the people that are proposing this new thing and DNREC. And then it's a chance to ask questions, get answers, and ensure that, they have a complete understanding of what's being proposed. That meeting would also be part of the public record, which is important, because sometimes people will stand up and tell you things that aren't completely true. But if it's not part of the public record, then you have no recourse. So if you wanted to file an appeal later on down the road, that information would not have been documented, and not be part of the public record, and therefore you couldn't use it in an appeal or any legal action you wanted to take. So we wanted to close that loophole to make sure that, whatever you tell people, better be real, and it better be factual. And, the notion that everybody has to be, sitting around watching their email all day to know what's going on, that doesn't work. You need to communicate with people. You need to send a notice. You need to appoint a person at the facility who's asking for this permit to be a liaison with the community. And that individual needs to send a notice to all of the residents in that community in their mail, hard mail, saying that this is what's going on. And here's kind of the schedule for how things will evolve so that people do become aware. And I think that'll help address some of those issues of people being, aware of what's happening in their locale.
Okay. Yeah. Now, Mark talked about the oversight committee. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so there's an EJ board, or Environmental Justice Oversight Board, that will be part of this new legislation, and that board will have 9 members on it. 6 of those members would be members of representatives from various communities. So there'd be people living in EJ communities across the state, and there will be some professionals there, to help, as well as some representatives from DNREC. So, but the majority of the membership would be from overburdened communities. There are a variety of roles that that oversight board would play. Probably the most important one would be that when there's an application for a permit, that board would be part of the public meetings, the hearings and the community information session, and they would review, the application, and they would make a recommendation to the secretary of DNREC as to whether or not that application ought to be approved. Now, they don't have final authority, right, to say yes or no. We don't really want that because we don't want to put
But that's
people
another voice.
Yeah, it's a significant voice. And in fact, if the secretary makes a decision that's different than what the board recommends, then he has to publish that and in terms of his reasoning for making a different decision. That also becomes part of the record. So that's one.
That can be appealed too.
And that can be appealed.
Yeah.
Right. And there's some other functions of the board would include things like ensuring that, as things evolve over time, we have all of the proper overburdened communities reflected in that bill. So today we've identified, some criteria that kind of specify or indicate, where these overburdened communities exist. But as times change, things can shift. So they would have a responsibility ensuring that list is up to date and it's maintained appropriately. Same things with the facilities. So the bill kind of defines the types of facilities and the size of those facilities, the scale that are concerned, just so that, there's a clear point of reference as to, these are the kind of businesses we're concerned about coming into our communities. And again, as time changes, right, new technologies come along, new things come along, and so that list is not all inclusive, as you look in the future, or probably won't be all inclusive as you look forward. So that board would have also the responsibility to ensure that list is up to date, add new facilities to it as needed over time. So it's oversight of the DNREC permitting process, but it's also oversight of all of the procedural things that go into the bill, the administrative components that have to do with ensuring that the bill stays airtight over time.
Okay, good. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and when we come back, I want to just finalize and talk a little bit more about the bill, about some of the, in my opinion, what do you consider to be one of the major injustices that is occurring currently in the environment arena?
Okay.
We'll be right back.
Local news and politics in the city of Wilmington, Delaware. The latest headlines with your host, Dr. C.T. Curry.
But they get rich, getting new cars, getting new houses, getting new opportunities, but the community is still getting nothing.
And co-host, Kobe Owens.
And from that time, we have slowly seen our democracy become under attack.
Weekly episodes. Sundays at 5 p.m. The Source.
How you guys doing today? My name is Brandon Snow. I'm president of Southbridge Civic Association. I've been a long-term resident of Southbridge. For those who don't know, my grandfather was Willie Snow. We had Snow's store on B and Hill, which was a long-standing staple in the community. I'm here as the new civic president to pledge my transparency and see the growth and prosperity of our community going forward. For those who need to reach me, feel free to reach out to me via email. It is southbridgecivicAssociationDE@gmail.com. And if you need to reach me by phone, feel free to reach out as well. I can be reached at 302-363-4788. Thank you.
And we're back. Great opportunity for us to hear from Willie today. Mr. Scott, you have really been a great source of information. I call it reminding us of some obligations that even we need to do as it relates to this whole environmental injustice situation that's going on. I've left the last segment really wanting to ask the question, what do you consider to be some of the major injustices as it relates to the environment? And while we were off camera, you were talking to me a little bit about the major for the Newcastle, then also down there. Help me. I think the viewers would love to hear some of this.
Yeah. So if you look at the state from north to south, and you look at Newcastle, the biggest environmental justice issues we have in Newcastle are related to air pollution. Mm-hmm. Certainly there are other issues of concerns with soil contamination. We got a lot of brownfield sites, but those are legacy issues. Yeah. What we have in terms of ongoing pollution, pollution today that's being generated, new pollution, is basically, air pollution. And that comes from all of the industrial sources and distribution centers and, other large commercial enterprises that we got in the northern part of the state. If you go down south, to Sussex, then the big issue there is, related to industrial poultry farming, where millions and millions of chickens and turkeys are grown, in that part of the state. And when you look at, the waste that's generated, from a chicken, and not just while the chicken's growing and being fed, but also once the chicken's slaughtered, there are waste components that come away from that process. And a lot of that contamination gets spread on the fields, farm fields, for fertilizer, or processed in other ways. But it eventually winds up leaching back into the soil. And the issue there is that waste is high in nitrates and bacteria in some cases. And so you got the issue with the soil itself, but it eventually leaches through the soil and down into the water table. Wow. And so the big environmental justice issue we see in the southern part of the state is from contaminated wells. And, you and Mark talked a little earlier on the previous segment, about the impact for people that can't afford, a city water hookup, if you want to pay for that, or afford the filtration that will be required to clean that water up, so that it's drinkable, consumable. And so that's a huge issue in the southern part of the state. So it's different from one end of the state to the other in terms of, what are the key issues, whether it's water in the southern part of the state and air in the northern part of the state.
But one of the things I guess we can agree on, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, is that in both, whether it be the south or the north part of the state, it all takes place mainly in the underprivileged communities.
Exactly.
Whether it be South, and that's why, sometimes we often say black and brown communities, but in this case, no, it's really for the underprivileged, the ones who don't have the means to be able to do and get.
Back to the sacrifice zones.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mark, yeah. Now, what I forgot to do earlier is to ask you, how do we get in touch to learn more about your organization? Do y'all have a website?
Yeah, so you can go to sierraclub.org/Delaware. And it'll take you to our website, our local chapter's website. And you'll see all of the information there on the things that the clubs are working on. Contact information is there, if you want to get in contact with somebody at the local chapter. And there's a calendar of events. One thing that's on that calendar is a monthly meeting we have for the Environmental Justice Committee, which is, by the way, the third Thursday of every month. Except maybe December, right? But every month we meet on the third Thursday at 7 o'clock by Zoom, so it's easy to engage and participate. But if you go to our website, sierraclub.org/Delaware, you'll see all of that information right there on the website.
Now, is there a phone number to your organization?
Yeah, but I don't remember it.
You don't remember it? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to make sure we put it on the screen for you.
Yeah, we'll do that.
So that people, just in case, I have seniors who sometimes don't want to get on the website.
Sure.
They want to just give a phone call and say, look, what can I do to help? How can I get more
Sure,
information?
yeah, we'll provide you that. Yeah.
All right, well, we'll make sure that we have it on the screen. Matter of fact, it's on the screen now for those of you who are watching. Let me go back a little bit to Newcastle County.
Mm-hmm.
Last week I shared with Mark how, I was privileged to have DNREC to give me a true education process of how contaminated this site we're currently sitting in was on.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we were able to clean it.
Right.
Okay, and I mean clean it well. But then we thought everything was fine, just to find out that the park right next door, the levels of toxics that's coming out of that park now, they have not closed it down yet, which I have a problem with.
Mm-hmm.
I don't let my kids go over there. I have our own, park here. But when is it important, in your opinion, when is it important for DNREC or whoever for the state is to say, you know what, this is inhabited, this is unsafe, this is not healthy. No, we have to close this down. At what point does that happen?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question, and it gets kind of convoluted, but the short answer is that should happen quickly, right? But that's one of the legacy issues that we've got in this part of the state. And again, it goes back to our history of being, a large industrial source or base, here in the state, where we had a lot of chemical plants and industrial facilities that, operated when we didn't have EPA, maybe before we even had an EPA, right? Mm-hmm. So there were limited regulations, on what they could do. And how they dispose of waste and control spills and those kind of things. And so you wind up with a bunch of what's called brownfield sites.
Right.
And we've got a bunch of them scattered throughout the state, particularly in the northern part of the state again. And so there are federal guidelines on how to deal with those things. The EPA has some rigorous guidelines on how to, number one, identify and the criteria for remediating, like you did here, cleaning up a site. But then it becomes an issue of money, right? So who's going to pay for it? And this is one of the things that really gets under my skin about some of the EJ issues we have, because one of the first pushbacks we get when we try to make improvements on some of the environmental justice issues is cost, right? Yeah, it's going to hurt profits for the business, or it's going to cost X amount of money. But in my mind, you also have to look at, okay, what does it cost me today? Okay, well, what does it cost us today, as a state, and for the citizens that have to live in those areas? And so
the deaths and mortality, all that.
Exactly. How do you put a price tag on poor health? You can't put a price tag on that. How do you account for the fact that, okay, a kid's got asthma and has to go to the emergency room 3 times a year, okay, because of an attack? How do you account for the cost of the medication, loss of quality of life, and so where do those costs come from? And who's paying those costs? Okay, it's not the company that created the problem. Those costs get subsidized or paid for by all of us, right? The state pays, which means we as taxpayers pay, right? And so in essence, we wind up subsidizing poor behavior of some of the industries, right? At the end of the day, we wind up paying for their bad habits, okay? And they move on with the profits. So I really push back on this notion that, okay, you're going to hurt my profits, okay, or is it costing too much money? Well, you're costing us too much money already, okay? And your profits are being maximized because we're subsidizing your poor operating tactics and skills. And that's the way we need to look at this, I think. But back to your question, yeah, the brownfield sites ought to be identified quickly, and I think they're typically identified quickly. And then the question is, how do you shut them down?
Right, because I was going to say, identify is one thing. They already identified that site.
Right.
It's still open.
Yeah, and that I think is still an open issue. I think that's still an open question. So they will limit, DNREC will limit what type of activity can take place in terms of, what can you build on that site now. But they won't necessarily do what you're suggesting, and that is that even while you're waiting for somebody to buy it or waiting for it to be remediated, how do you put a fence around it and say no entry?
Yeah, because that particular site is not going to be bought. That's a state park.
Right.
No, it's a city. It's one of the two. It's city park, and nobody's going to buy that. But yet our kids are playing in that dirt.
Yeah, and exactly. And the other one that bugs me sometimes is that we have seen often where a facility wants to do something in a community, expand or whatever, and kind of as retribution, it's like, okay, well, we'll donate some money and make a park space, okay, which on the surface is great. I mean, it's a recreational area for the kids and, activity. But when you step back and look at it, but you're playing in an area where you're breathing poison, okay, and so, yeah, there's a space to play in, but it's not a healthy space to be in. And I think it's the same issue you're describing here in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and then parents don't understand why their children are developing asthma. They don't understand why they are having some issues even with keeping attention.
Learning disabilities, yeah.
And that's exactly where I was going to land at with their learning disabilities. And a lot of this has, I shouldn't even act as if I'm the expert in this. Do you believe that environmental issues can affect learning abilities?
Yeah, in particular, lead. Okay, lead poisoning we know has serious implications on brain development. Yeah, particularly with young kids. There are other toxins that can have neurological effects, and so it depends on what chemicals we're talking about. But yeah, there are clear links to neurological impact, brain development and learning capability, as well as respiratory, heart, cancer. All of those things are linked to toxic chemicals.
Yeah, I often think, what if Michael Jordan was raised in an environment that was highly toxic? How would he have really fared out? I do that for reasons to get people to see that, thank God that he obviously did very well, but what if he would end up having an asthma issue?
Right.
How would, and then you have a young man by the name of Hank Gathers who was raised in the exact same projects I was raised in, and he did develop a respiratory and a heart issue, and ended up dying on the floor years ago. Right. And he and I were the same age. We were from the same. In fact, he lived on one floor, I lived on another floor, and I sit back and I say, I thank God that I don't believe I had any real issues. Here recently, I'm having some allergy issues. That's get overwhelming me. But for the most part, people are breathing in stuff and it's killing them slowly. It is nothing to worry about to the place where we now need to run around with masks on. Right. But it is something that we need to start addressing and becoming aware of so that we can certainly do better with our environment that we live in.
Yeah, and one of the pushbacks we get a lot, particularly from health officials, when you try to say that, okay, there's a cause and effect relationship between the air that people breathe and their health condition. Often they will push back and say, well, it could be, okay, but it also could be lifestyle choices, right? So the people that live in the communities that you described, that that we talk about, they also smoke, they drink, and all this other stuff, and they don't eat well. Well, maybe that's true, okay, and at some level, okay, but at the end of the day, nobody can tell me in a convincing manner that breathing poison all day is good for you.
Thank you.
Okay, which is the reason you don't live here, okay? That's the reason you live in Greenville or somewhere else, is because you don't want to be around this stuff. So why do you think anybody else should be exposed to it? Absolutely. And that just becomes an argument that we have into perpetuity, I guess. It's pushing back on that issue. There's always an argument that there's no clear, concise data to link breathing toxins to poor health outcomes. And in my mind, yeah, there is. Okay, the data says there is. You just want to challenge the data by introducing other variables into it.
Absolutely. So they can't get out there because it causes the rich not to be able to make the profits that they really want to make. Exactly. And I think that's where my disdainment continues to be, is that we sit back and we allow this. And that's why I wanted to bring you as well as Mark on to just talk about it. And as I share with Mark, I'll share with you. I'm going to bring you back. We're going to talk about it. And when we get ready to open up the session for the new state representative session, I really want to make sure that we are talking about this. When I bring on some of our state politicians who do come to the show, I'm going to ask that question: how are we doing with environment environmental injustice bills that are coming through. HB 422 is going to be one of the ones I constantly talk about. Or I'll just make sure that I say the what do we name that? The People's Anti-Bill. Yeah, so I think that's going to be important that we continue to talk about it more and more. Is there anything, as we're closing up, the time really went by really fast, but is there anything else you would like to make sure that you share so that the people who are watching, I have seniors watching, I have younger people watching, I have everybody watching. Is there anything else you would like to share at this time?
No, just to follow up on your last point, when we get to a point with the next session coming up, which will be late December and, moving into early next year, when we reintroduce the bill, what's going to be important to counter the opposition that we're getting, from the business community, et cetera, is to have people engaged and involved.
Yes.
And so it's one thing for the Sierra Club to be involved, or the Nature Center, or the Nature Conservancy, but we need to have the people from the communities that are affected engaged and really pushing this bill. And what that looks like in my mind is, advocacy efforts around contacting your legislator, your local rep, your local senator, your state senator and state reps for your district. But also, when it comes time to bring that bill to the floor, there are two key times there. One being when it goes into a committee for a hearing. And, people have an opportunity then to come to Lake Hall, and we can work on transportation and all that good stuff.
Yes.
And either testify as to why you think this is a good thing or not. And even if you don't want to testify, just be there.
Right.
Okay. Show presence, right? And then the second opportunity to do essentially the same thing is when it comes forward to a vote in the House, for passage in the House, and then eventually go over to the Senate and go through the same process.
And the governor signing it.
And the governor signing it. So what's key is to have people present at Lake Hall. Well, number one, to bug your representative and your senator to say, hey, I want this bill brought to the floor. Okay. And then when it does have an opportunity to come to the floor, is that we fill that room up with people from the community that can speak to the issue that this bill is trying to address, their personal lived experience, and living in such an environment, and why they think it's important to move this bill forward. So the only way we can overcome the power of profit and money, okay, is with people. And so we got to get people engaged and involved. And I'm happy that you've given us the opportunity to get the message out to your congregation.
I'm joining forces. I want to be a part of this. I want to make sure that I'm not just giving you an opportunity to come on and have a conversation for 1 hour, but I really wanted to make sure that we start the conversation.
Right.
We've started it. We're going to need people to push our politicians so that so other folks won't be profiting off of our lives.
Exactly.
This community, whether it be the underprivileged community, whether it be any community, they have some God-given rights. You use the word civil rights, and that's true. But I'm on the preacher side, so I'm going to say there. God-given rights.
It starts there.
To be able to breathe, God gave us that. To be able to drink fresh water that is uncontaminated, God provides it.
Exactly.
So we must make sure we protect that by all means.
Exactly.
Mr. Scott, it has been a joy, a privilege of meeting you. One, this is my first time getting a chance to meet you. And two, I'm looking forward for a continued conversation. And like you said, we'll make sure if you need help with the transportation, whatever, or if we need to come here on a Sunday morning and encourage some of our membership to go down, as well as those who are watching, we want to make that happen. Great. Because this is something that I'm investing in. All right.
Great.
So thank you so very much for the time with us today, and we look forward to the next time. We'll be right back.
Hello, I'm Marcus Henry, and I'm running for Newcastle County Executive. I spent over 20 years working in state and local government, trying to bring the good programs and services you deserve here in Newcastle County. Please support my campaign. Please look us up at marcushenrybe.com for further information. I look forward to meeting you all over the next year, and I look forward to your support. Thank you.
Hello, Wilmington. I am Michelle Harley, and I represent the 4th Councilmatic District. The communities in the 4th District are Southbridge, the Riverfront, Midtown Brandywine, Trinity Vicinity, and a portion of the East Side. I am running for my re-election on Tuesday, September the 10th for the 4th District City Council seat, and I would love for you to donate and to consider volunteering To learn more about what I am doing and what I plan to do, you can visit my website at www.michelleharley.com. Together, we can move the 4th District forward. Thank you.
And we're back. Great show, both shows, last week and this week. I am just moved and floored with how, honestly, people value lives. That's where I want to start at in my closing today. It's a disgrace that people value those who don't have above those who do. The privileged and the unprivileged. We're all God's children. And whether you live on 4th Street or you live in Greenville, there are some God-given rights. It shouldn't be based on your zip code or how much money you have in the bank for you to be treated as a person. When we talk about injustice, we have to stop limiting it to just when there's police brutality or when there's some injustice that we heard about where a person had been knocked upside the head or whatever else it may be. This is an egregious injustice. Why? Because you can't breathe. Why? You can't drink. It's in our communities. Very strong. And I'm aware of it because I had to build here in Southbridge. And I have to, and even though with the new housing that we're building right now, there was no requirement for me to test the soil over there. But because of my awareness of what we were dealing with over here and on this side of the campus, I had the soil tested to ensure that we won't just put a building on top of a dirty site. It was important to me. Human life matters. Please do not say, well, he didn't have anybody that excited on today. Nobody who can start the latest gossip. This is life-changing information. We can't do better if we don't rise up to be better. When we come back into the next session for down at Leg Hall, it is time for us to go down. Let's go down. Let's make sure our senators, our state senators, as well as our state representatives are very aware that you are aware. And we're not going to take treating the underprivileged community as if it's worthless. We matter. All of us matter because we're God's children. Mr. Willie Scott came on today, and I was very grateful. I had an opportunity to sit and really learn. That's why I didn't ask a lot of questions. I wanted to hear and I wanted to absorb so that it can help kindle the fire in me to continue to fight for those who have no voice. I want to thank Mark as well. Both of them did a phenomenal job over the last 2 weeks, and this will not be the last we hear of them. We're going to continue this battle because I believe everyone should be able to have clean air and should be able to have drinkable water. And not just EPA standard, but to a place where we get to say who can come into our communities. As opposed to saying, we're going to give you new jobs, and then automatically politicians say, let's do it. No. How much diesel trucks are going to come up and down this highway? How much other pollutants are going to be in the air? Will it cause problems to go into the soil, then from the soil into the water? All of those things matter. And my job as the pastor, my job as a community leader, my job as a person who have the opportunity to have some privileges is to be the voice at the table and make sure I share the information with you. It's been a good 2 weeks. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you continue to follow us, and if those of you on the YouTube, like us, share. We believe everything is going to be great. Until the next time we get together, may the Lord God bless you real good.
Thank you for watching this episode of Coffee with Curry. Tune in next week, Sunday at 11 a.m.